Hello again. Today we're going to be looking at another exciting topic, and that is reproductive system in plants. Reproductive system in plants. Now, before we continue, I would like to do a little highlight on reproduction. Now, reproduction has to actually deal with the process by which living organisms give rise to new individuals after their kind. And we said the major purpose for reproduction is to ensure continuous existence of life. And we have two main types of reproduction. We have the sexual reproduction and we have asexual reproduction. Now, it might interest you to understand and note that plants undergo both sexual reproduction and also asexual reproduction. Plants undergo asexual reproduction by vegetative reproduction, where we have both artificial and natural vegetative reproduction. Things like marcoting, grafting, layering, cutting, and so on. All these are aspects of reproduction, mostly asexual. But plants also undergo sexual reproduction, just the same way animals also undergo sexual reproduction. Plants do undergo sexual reproduction, and they undergo sexual reproduction by fertilization. And we're going to be looking and exploring a whole lot about plants and see how they carry out reproduction. Remember, I said if you go to some of our videos, we said that animals, they mostly mammals, they have gametes. When you're talking about sexual reproduction, it has to do with the production and the union of gametes. Now, do plants also produce gametes? Do plants also undergo fertilization? We're going to be looking at all of these in this particular topic. All right. Now, but before we go into this particular topic, I'd like us to look at some of the things or areas we are likely to touch in this series of reproductive system in plants. We're going to be looking at the definition of a flower. We're going to be looking at definition of a flower. We're also going to be looking at types of flowers. We're going to be looking at structural parts of a flower and their functions. We're also going to be talking about the floral parts of a flower. We're also going to be looking at types of ovaries of a flower. And then finally, we're going to talk about placentation of a flower. Placentation of a flower. And in this particular discussion, we're going to be exploring a whole lot. Now, before we start, I'd like us to take note of our specific objective. Now, the specific objectives are actually areas you should be able to explain or mention or give a little talk on by the end of this particular topic. Now, one of them is that at the end of this topic, you should be able to define a flower and also mention some of the types of flowers. Number two, you should be able to draw the structure of a flower, a typical flower, and mention the parts and their functions. I could recall in most practical exams, mostly WAEC and so on, they usually, most times in practicals, they bring a particular flower and they ask you to identify and also draw the flower and then state the functions of some of the floral parts of these flowers. So it's very important to take note of it. Then also number three, you should be able to mention the floral parts of a flower. And then number four, you should also be able to mention the types of ovaries. We have different types of ovary in flowering plants. And then also number five, you should be able to mention the types of placentation, not just only mentioning them, you should be able to identify them. So types of placentation in flowering plants. So these are the areas you're expected to at least note by the end of this class. Now let's start with plants. Remember, I just said, I think while we started, I told you that plants also undergo sexual reproduction. Now, plants, if you look at the structure of a plant has, there are several organs structures or organs that make up a plant. A plant has a root. Most times when you ask people or children to draw a plant, they draw the stem of the plant, they draw leaves, they draw the roots, and they draw the flowers. Now, these are major parts of the plant. The plant has the roots, which helps for anchorage and also helps to absorb water and dissolve the mineral salts in the soil. The plant also has the stem, which helps to conduct both mineral salt and water to the leaves, and also helps also in the conduction of food, manufactured food, from the leaves to the roots and other parts of the plant. The plant or a typical plant also is made up of leaves. Okay, we have different types, different shapes of leaves and so on, but they have leaves. And these leaves, one of the major functions of the leaves is for the manufacturing of food. In fact, that is the site for photosynthesis to actually occur. Now, also in a plant, there are flowers. Now, most plants that have flowers are actually referred to as flowering plants. Now, the reason for considering flowers is because flowers also have their own particular function. The major function of flowers in plants is actually for reproduction. So hence our discussion today. So what we're discussing today has to do with flowers and not the roots, not the leaves, not the stems, because the flower is the reproductive part of a plant. So what is a flower? By definition, a flower is the reproductive part or structure of a flowering plant. Please also note, plants can exhibit, like I said before, both sexual and asexual reproduction. But note this, flowering plants undergo sexual reproduction. Flowering plants undergo sexual reproduction. Now, most flowering plants are bisexual, while some are unisexual. If you could remember when we talked about bisexuality and unisexuality in reproduction in mammals, I mentioned, or when we talked about reproduction in mammals, I mentioned bisexual and unisexual. As the name implies, bisexual, they have both male and female sex organs. And then also when you say unisexual, it means it has just a male or it has a female. Okay, now in plants you can see both bisexual and unisexual. There are some flowering plants that have both the male and the female features or reproductive organs or system in one plant, and there are some flowering plants that are just unisexual. It is either a male or a female. All right, but we're not going to be exploring all of this, but I want you to just understand this, that a flower is the reproductive part of a plant, Now, we have different types of flowers. We're going to be exploring a whole lot of the types of flowers, and it's very important. Most past questions deal on these types of flowers. They ask questions most times on types of flowers. Now, the first one on the list here is inflorescence flower. Inflorescence flower. Now, inflorescence flower, they are actually groups of flowers that attach themselves to a common stalk. Group of flowers that attach themselves to a common stalk. Now, you see this expression in flowers like Pride of Barbados. Pride of Barbados. If you've seen Pride of Barbados, yes, they actually show inflorescence flower. They are most times referred to as inflorescence flower because the group of their flowers or their petals or whatever, they are all attached to a common stalk. Number two is the solitary flower. The solitary flower. Now, the solitary flower is a flower that is attached singly, either to the leaf axil or to the tip of the branch. They are attached singly. In inflorescence, they are attached as a group to a common or a single stalk. But in this case, they are attached singly to the leaf axil or to the tip of the branch. And you see examples like this type of flower is seen in hibiscus flower and also in pawpaw flower, which is the carica papaya flower. Now, number 3 is what we call the perfect flower. Now, why do we call it a perfect flower? It is referred to as a perfect flower because it has both the carpels and the stamens in it. We're going to be looking more about what carpels and stamens are, but let me just give it to you what carpels are. Carpels are actually the female reproductive part of a flower, and while the stamens are the male reproductive part of a flower. So a flower that has both the male and the female reproductive part in a particular flower is referred to as a perfect flower. Now, a Pride of Barbados is an example of a perfect flower. If you take a look at the structure, or you go and pick up a Pride of Barbados flower, you will actually see the male part of the flower, which is the stamens, and then you are also going to identify the female part of the flower, which is the carpels. Now, number 4 is what we call the imperfect flower. The imperfect flower. I believe you can be able to guess why it is imperfect. Now, the reason why it is referred to as an imperfect flower is because the carpels, any flower that the carpels and the stamens are naturally missing. When they are naturally missing, they are referred to as what? Imperfect flower. Where the carpels or the stamens, they are naturally missing, is referred to as imperfect flower. An example is the maize plant flower, okay? The maize plant. So they are, is also an example of an imperfect flower. Number 5 is complete flower. A complete flower. Now, what do we call a complete flower? Now, a complete flower is actually a flower that has naturally all the 4 floral parts. All the 4 floral parts. And like I said, in the course of our discussion, we're going to be looking at what we mean by floral parts of a flower. And we'll see how to identify these floral parts of a flower. But for clarity's sake, now the floral parts of a flower, they include the petals, they include the sepals, they include the stamens, and then they include the carpels. So these 4 floral parts, if they are naturally present in a flower, that particular flower is referred to as a complete flower. It's referred to as a complete flower. And then number 6, definitely it's the incomplete flower. So of course you should be able to guess that one out. An incomplete flower is a flower that lacks one or more of the floral parts. One or more of the floral parts. So any flower that lacks one or more of the floral parts is actually referred to as an incomplete flower. Referred to as an incomplete flower. An example is maize flower, and we also have the pawpaw flower. They lack one or more parts of the floral parts of the flower. All right, number 7 is called regular flower. Regular flower. Now, a regular flower is actually a flower that has all members of a whorl on it. All members of a whorl on it. We're also going to be looking at the whorls of a flower. So a flower that has all the members of the whorls on it identical in shape and in size. Now, when we're looking at the whorls of the flower, we are specifically looking at the petals. Now, a flower that has the petals identical in shape, and if they are identical in size, it can also be referred to as a regular flower. Now, a regular flower also can be cut vertically into two similar halves through any one of several vertical places. So you can cut them into two several similar halves wherever you are cutting it from, but it has to be a vertical sectioning. Now, a regular flower can also be called an actinomorphic flower. Actinomorphic flower. Actinomorphic flower. So an actinomorphic flower is also referred to as a regular flower. An example of a regular flower or an actinomorphic flower is called hibiscus flower. Hibiscus flower. Next 8 is irregular flower. Now, an irregular flower is a type of flower in which the members of the whorl are not similar. Now, when they are not similar, we're looking at the petals again. So if the petals are not similar in shape, if they are not similar in size, it is referred to as an irregular flower. Also, the flower can be cut vertically into two similar halves through only one plane. Only on one plane. Remember, in a regular flower, they can be cut into two identical or similar halves from any plane, from any vertical plane. But in this case, it has to do with only one plane. Now, irregular flowers can also be called zygomorphic flower. They can be called zygomorphic flower. An example of a zygomorphic flower is Pride of Barbados, as well as the Delonyx. Delonyx flower is also an example of an irregular flower. Number 9. We have the axillary flower. The axillary flower, these are actually flowers that are born on the axil of the leaves, as the name implies. They are found in the axils of the leaves. And then also we have the terminal flower. Now, these are flowers that are born at the end. That's why it's called a terminal. They are born at the end of stems or branches. At the end of stems or branches. We also have the bisexual flower. You could have heard me say something about bisexual and unisexual. Now, bisexual flowers are flowers that has both carpels and stamens. Any flower that has a carpel and a stamen is referred to as a bisexual flower. It can also be called a perfect flower. Now, bisexual flowers can also be called a hermaphrodite. Every time you hear the word bisexual, it talks about a hermaphrodite. In terms of humans, if humans or any animal that is bisexual is also referred to as a hermaphrodite. That means that particular animal has both male and female reproductive systems on one particular organism or animal. Now, an example of a bisexual flower is Pride of Barbados. We also have the hibiscus flower. The hibiscus flower, Pride of Barbados, these are all examples of bisexual flower. And then also we have the unisexual flower. Unisexual flower is actually a type of flower that has either stamens or carpels as its sexual parts. It has a stamen, it has a carpel, not both, but one, as its sexual part. Now, a flower that has only one carpel or only carpels is called a pistillate. A flower with just carpels is called a pistillate. An example, you have pawpaw and maize. But a flower that has only stamens is called a staminate. When it is pistillate, it only possesses carpels. But when it is a staminate, it only possesses a stamen. Also, you can see it in pawpaw and maize. Now, the reason why we are saying pawpaw and maize, it simply means that there is a particular male pawpaw flower, and then also there is a female pawpaw flower. All right. Then also with the same thing, we have a male pawpaw and flower, a male maize flower and a female maize flower. Okay. Then we also have what we call monoecious flower. Monoecious flower. Now, monoecious flower, this is a type of flower in which the male and the female parts of the flower are located on the same plant. If they are located on the same plant, it is referred to as a monoecious flower. So a particular plant has different flowers, but there are some plants that have male flowers different from female flowers, okay, in the same plant. Once a particular plant has a male flower and has a female flower, but they are all located in one particular plant, it is referred to as monoecious. An example is oil palm and what? Maize. And then we also have the one we call dioecious flower. Dioecious flower. Now, a dioecious flower is a type of flower in which the male and the female part of the flower are located on different plants. Get the difference? They are located on different plants. In terms of monoecious, they are all located in the same plant, but in terms of dioecious, they are located on different plants. An example also is the pawpaw plant. An example is pawpaw plant. And then we also have what we call the essential part of a flower. Now, what are the essential parts of the flower? The essential part of the flower are the stamens and the carpels. These are the essential parts of the flower. Now, why are they actually referred to as the essential part of the flower? It is simply because they produce gametes which are required for fertilization, and they bring about the formation of seeds and fruits. They bring about the formation of seeds and fruits. In fact, reproduction takes place with the help of stamens and carpels. So they are referred to as essential flowers. And then we also have the non-essential flowers. Non-essential flowers. Now, the non-essential flowers, parts of the flower rather, non-essential part of the flower. The non-essential parts of the flower include the sepals, it includes the petals. So sepals and petals are regarded as non-essential parts of the flower. The reason is simply because they do not produce gametes, and they are not required for fertilization to take place. And they don't also bring about the formation of seeds and fruits. So hence they are referred to as non-essential parts of a flower. Now, these are the types of flowers we have. Now, but if you look at a flower, a typical flower consists of several parts. A typical flower consists of several parts. Now, let's take a look at the parts of a flower and their functions. Parts of a flower and their functions. Number one is the pedicel. The pedicel is a part of the flower. Now, it attaches the flower to the stem. If you see a stem and a flower, you'll see that the flower is attached to a stem. Now, that part that is attached to the stem, or you can call it a stalk, is the pedicel. We also have another part of a flower. It is called the receptacle. The receptacle. Now, the major function of the receptacle is that it holds the other floral parts of the flower. It carries and holds the other part, hold together the floral parts of the flower. Now, after the receptacle is like it is cup-shaped. Okay, it holds and carries the floral parts of the flower. And then we have the next one, which is called the sepals. Now, the sepals encloses and protects the other floral parts of the flower. It encloses and protects, that is this function, closes and protects the other floral parts of the flower. We also have the stamens. Now, sorry, the petals rather. The petals are the brightly colored part of the flower. Now, these brightly colored part of the flower, they act one of these major functions is that it attracts insects for photosynthesis. It attracts insects for photosynthesis. And then also another part of a flower is that the flower consists of a stamen. That is, if it is a perfect flower, it consists of a stamen. Now, the stamen is the male reproductive part of the flower. It produces the male gametes in flowers. Now, the stamen consists of filaments and anther. Now, the filament is a slender part of the distance, and then the anther is at the top, at the tip of it, usually swollen, filled with pollen grains. We're going to be looking at structures of it. So the filament carries and holds the anther, while the anther actually carries the pollen grains, which are the male reproductive sex cells of a flower, or you can call it the male gamete of what? A flower. And then we also have the carpels. Now, the carpels is the female reproductive organ of a flower. The female reproductive organ of a flower. Now, it consists of the ovary, it consists of the style, and then it consists of the stigma. So we have the stigma at the top. The ovary connects the stigma to the style connects the stigma to the ovary. Now, what is the major function of the ovary? The ovary contains the ovules. And the ovary, after fertilization, actually develops into a fruit. Please note that. Ovary, after fertilization, develops into a fruit, while the ovules develop into a seed after fertilization. Please note, ovary develops into a fruit after fertilization, while the ovules, which contains the egg or the ovum, develops into a seed after fertilization. Another part of the carpels is the style. I told you that the style connects the stigma to the ovary. It is also the passage through which it also serves as a passage for pollen tubes during fertilization in plants. We're going to be looking at that in some other videos. We're going to be talking about fertilization in plants. And then we also have the stigma. Now, the stigma is the part of the carpels that actually receives pollen grains during pollination. It receives pollen grains during pollination. So these are actually the parts of a flower. As you can see it as a structure here, you can see the stigma, you can also see the style, you can see clearly the ovary there, and they are all called, you can call them carpels, or you can still call it a pistil. Now, when it is one, it is referred to as a pistil. All right. Now you can see the stamens there. The stamens it consists of the anther and the filament. You can see the the petals, they are red in color, and then you can see the sepals green in color. Now underneath it, you can see you can see this where the cursor is. That is where we have the receptacle. This is the receptacle. That's the receptacle. And then the stalk connects to the stem, all right, which we have as the pedicel. Now, next is types of ovary. Types of ovary. Now, there are different types of ovary. We have about 3 main types of ovary in flowering plants. And we're going to be looking at these types of ovary. But before we continue, please take a look at the screen. You can see this thing that is red here is the ovary. You can see the position of the ovary. First, it is on top, the receptacle. You see it is inside, not fully immersed, but here it is completely immersed. So this one is on top, this one is at the same level, and then this one is below. So we have 3 types of ovary. The first one is called superior ovary. Superior ovary. Now, the superior ovary is when the ovary is placed above other floral parts of the flower. You could see what we checked when we were looking at the picture concerning ovaries. concerning the types of ovaries. Like you can see on the screen here, this is the superior ovary. It is placed above other floral parts of the flower on the receptacle. This is the receptacle. You can see all these ones are beneath it. So it is above it. So we call such kinds of flower, we say that type of ovary is referred to as a superior ovary. Now, flowers with superior ovary are called hypogynous flowers. They are called hypogynous flowers. Examples of hypogynous flowers are hibiscus flower. So hibiscus flower is an example of a hypogynous flower. Number 2 is half inferior ovary. Half inferior ovary. Now, half inferior ovary is when the ovary is placed almost at the same level with other floral parts of the flower on the receptacle. On the receptacle. If we still go back again to check the presentation there, the pictures there, you can see this is the receptacle. This is the receptacle. So you can see that these other floral parts of the flower are on the same place, on the receptacle. They are on the receptacle. All right. So that is half inferior ovary. Now, a flower with half inferior ovary is called the perigynous flower. Perigynous flower. An example of a perigynous flower is rose flower. It's the rose flower. And then also we have the third type of ovary, which is called inferior ovary. The inferior ovary. Now, the inferior ovary is when the ovary is placed below other floral parts of the flower on the receptacle. They are placed below other floral parts of the flower on the receptacle. Now, a flower with an inferior ovary is called epigynous. Hypogynous is superior. Okay, hypogynous is superior, and we have the other one which is for half inferior, which is perigynous, and then we also have the one for inferior ovary, which is epigynous flower. An example of an epigynous flower is the canna lily flower. Canna lily flower. Now, these are the different types of ovaries in flowering plants. Now, next thing I want to actually stress out is the floral parts of the flower. Now, we have 4 floral parts of the flower. Four floral parts. We have, I've mentioned them, we have the sepals, we have the petals, and then we have the stamens, and then the carpels. Please note that. When we're talking about parts of the flower, I mentioned these, and I also gave you their functions. I told you that the sepals, it carries or holds the other floral parts of the flower. Usually in some flowers, you see them as green. Then we also have the petals. We have the petals. Now, the petals are the brightly colored part of the flower. They are called the floral parts of the flower. So one of the major function is to attract insects for pollination. And then we also have the stamens, which is the male part of the flower. It consists of what? The filament and the anther, which carries what? The pollen grains, which is the male reproductive, which is the male gametes. And then we also have the 4th floral part of the flower, which is called the carpels. And I told you that the carpels is the female part of the flower, and it is made up, or it consists of the stigma, the style, and then the ovary, which contains the ovules. All right. So these, please note, these are the 4 floral parts of the flower. We have the sepals, we have the petals, we have the stamens, and then we have the carpels. Right. Now, the next thing to talk about, last subtopic to look at here, is placentation in flowering plants. Placentation in flowering plants. Now, what is placentation? Now, placentation is not the same definition as we have in humans, mostly reproduction in humans. Placentation simply means the arrangement of the ovules within the ovary. Placentation, one more time, means the arrangement of the ovules within the ovary, the arrangement of the ovules within the ovary. And basically, there are 5 types of placentations in flowering plants. Number 1 is what we call marginal placentation. Number 2 is axial placentation. Number 3 is parietal placentation. Number 4 is free central placentation. And number 5 is basal placentation. Now, let's take a look at each of them. Marginal placentation. Now, in this placentation, the ovule is attached to the placenta along one margin of the ovary. Along one margin of the ovary. Now, an example of flowers that have marginal placentation, or plants with marginal placentation, includes most of the legumes. We have beans, we have cowpea, we have pride of Barbados. They all have marginal placentation. If you check the fruits and the seed, remember we said that placentation is the arrangement of the ovules within the ovary. Next is axial placentation. Axial placentation. Now, what is axial placentation? It is a type of placentation in which the ovule is attached to the placenta at the center. The ovule is attached to the placenta at the center. Now, you see example of this type of placentation in tomatoes. So if you look at it on the screen there, you're going to see this type of placentation. It is found in tomato. Now, we also have number 3, which is called the parietal placentation. Parietal placentation is a type of placentation in which the ovule is attached to the sides of a syncarpous ovary. Sides of syncarpous ovary. Now, you see this type of ovary or placentation in pawpaw plant. And then also we have the next one, which is free central placentation. Free central placentation. Now, this in free central placentation, the ovule is borne on a knob, just like you see something like a knob. Is borne on a knob projecting from the base of the ovary. Now, you see that also in an example is in canna lily. You see it in canna lily. And then finally, we have the basal placentation. Now, the ovule in basal placentation is attached to the base of a syncarpous ovary. To the base of a syncarpous ovary. And you'll see an example of that type of placentation in sunflower. You see it in a sunflower. So this is where we call it a wrap-up on this particular topic. But before we go, let's try our hands on few questions using the Examguide app. We have quite some of them. Now look at this. They said a flower that has both stamens and pistil is said to be A, is it imperfect? B, is it pistillate? C, is it staminate? And then D, is it perfect? Remember I told you if it is imperfect, it means it does not have stamens, or it does not have carpels or pistil. But if it has only pistil, it is referred to as pistillate. If it has only stamen, it is referred to as staminate. But the question is, a flower that has both stamens and pistillate is referred to as a perfect flower. It's referred to as a perfect flower. And then number 2 question says, in flowering plants, fertilization will occur, though we've not talked about fertilization, but the same notion we have are explained under reproduction in humans. Fertilization, it has to do with the fusion of the nucleus of 2 gametes. Once there is a fusion of gametes, of the nuclei, it is referred to as what? Fertilization. So the correct answer is one of the nuclei inside the pollen grain tube fuses with the ovum. So it is the fusion that brings about fertilization. Number 3, that's a structure of a flower. Now they said the male sex cell are contained in the part labeled. Now, if you look at 2, closely, if you could see it very closely, you will discover that the arrow 2 is actually pointing to the anther. It's pointing to the anther. So the male sex cell, which is pollen grains in flowering plants, is located at the anther. So for me, the answer is option D. Look at this, number 4. They said a flower that has both stamens and pistil. Of course, we said it is a perfect flower. Take a look at this structure. Now, they said the process of pollination. Okay, we've not talked about pollination. They said the essential part of a flower that is meant for pollination and fruit formation. Listen to that. That is meant for pollination and fruit formation. Fruit formation is not just the ovary. It's not the corolla. They didn't say only pollination. It's also not the receptacle, but it is the pistil, because the pistil is also responsible for it. For pollination, the pistil contains the stigma that receives the pollen grains, and also in the pistil there is the ovary, which brings about the formation of fruits after fertilization takes place. So the correct answer there is option D. Now look at this. They said the male reproductive part of a flower is made up of anther and filament. The anther and the filament. And then question 8 says a flowering plant that has both male and female flowers. Look at that. Both male and female flowers on the same plant. I mentioned this while teaching. On the same plant, it is known as what? Monoecious. It's known as monoecious. But when they are found in different plants, it is referred to as dioecious. All right? So, question 9 says the male reproductive organ of a flower is what? The stamens. And then finally, question 10 is still the same structure of the flower. The part labeled 2. The part labeled 2, as you can see, that is the anther of the flower. Okay, that is the anther of the flower. So this is what we call it a wrap-up in this particular class on reproductive system in plants. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in our next video. Bye for now.